It wasn't a hearing. It was a public execution. I stood there in my best suit, the one I bought when I was promoted to senior inspector, and watched my career get dismembered on a polished mahogany table. My boss, a man I'd considered a mentor, held up my report, the one detailing the 17 cases of wasting lung in the community's downwind of the Oakhaven burial mounds, and he didn't just dismiss it. He pitied me. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice dripping with condescending sorrow, "these are not scientific observations. They are ghost stories. You're talking about airborne curses and spectral contagions. This department deals in pathogens, not phantoms." He slid my termination papers across the table. "Get some help, Leo." That was the moment my world split open. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the chilling, absolute certainty in his eyes that I was insane. And the even more terrifying certainty in my gut that he was wrong. My exile began that night, at the family dinner table. I tried to explain, to show them the data, the particulate matter spikes that correlated perfectly with drops in barometric pressure over the mounds, the strange, low-frequency hum my equipment picked up. My father, a man who measured his worth in stock portfolios and respectable job titles, just shook his head. "You threw away a pension for what? For ghost hunting? You're a disgrace, Leo." My sister, Sarah, was worse. She tried to be kind, which felt like being stabbed with a soft pillow. "Maybe it's the stress," she'd said, her eyes pleading. "You've been working too hard. We can find you a good doctor, someone to talk to." They didn't hear a warning. They heard a breakdown. They saw a son, a brother unraveling into a pathetic, superstitious mess. The mockery was relentless. It became the family joke. Don't let Leo check the air. He might find a ghoul in the vents. So I left. I took my severance, every penny I had, and I didn't just lean into the obsession. I became it. I built a mobile lab in a beaten-up van, a hermetically sealed bubble of steel and desperation. I chased burial sites, forgotten cemeteries, places where history had left a deep, infected wound in the earth. I was no longer a health inspector. I was a spectral epidemiologist, a title I gave myself in the buzzing silence of lonely nights. And I started to find it everywhere. A fine, gray dust, almost invisible, that carried something. It wasn't a virus. It was older. It was an emission of pure despair, an airborne memory of suffering, so concentrated it became a physical blight. It settled in the lungs, yes, but it didn't just scar them. It hollowed a person out from the inside, replacing their vitality with a profound, crushing emptiness, a longing for the grave. I got sick myself, of course. In a fog-choked field in rural Maine, I collapsed, my lungs feeling like they were full of powdered glass and sorrow. I woke up, staring at my own monitors, the needles screaming into the red. I was breathing it in, but I was also analyzing it. I wasn't just its victim, I was its student. I designed a filtration system, a custom respirator that used oscillating sonic frequencies to destabilize the particulate's charge. It wasn't a cure. It was a shield. It allowed me to walk through the poison, to breathe in the heart of the curse and survive. I started publishing my findings on fringe forums, mapping the outbreaks the CDC couldn't explain. They called me the Ashen Prophet. I was no longer a disgrace. I was a Cassandra for a world that was only just beginning to realize it was haunted. The call came on a Tuesday. It was Sarah. Her voice was thin, terrified. "Leo," she whispered, "Dad's sick. The doctors, they don't know. He's just fading." He sits by the window and stares at the old woods. He says the air feels heavy. I didn't have to ask. I already knew. The Oakhaven Mounds were less than 5 miles from our childhood home. The curse I had warned them about, the one they'd laughed at, was now knocking on their door. When I pulled up to the house, it was like driving into a memory. But the air was wrong. It tasted of dust and static. I walked in wearing my field gear, the respirator hanging around my neck like a grim talisman. They were all there. Mom, Sarah, her husband, their faces pale and drawn. My father was in his armchair, a ghost in his own home. He was thin, fragile, his eyes lost in the middle distance. The silence in the room was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. They stared at me, not as their failed son, but as a priest from some dark, forgotten religion. "It's here, isn't it?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking. I didn't answer. I just unslung my primary air quality monitor and set it on the coffee table. I powered it on. The quiet hum was immediately shattered by a high, piercing shriek. A blood-red light flooded the room, reflecting in their wide, terrified eyes. The digital readout, which measured spectral particulate density, was higher than any I'd ever recorded outside of a burial mound's epicenter. "What is that?" my mother stammered. "It's proof," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the triumph I once craved. I walked to the window and ran a finger along the sill, showing them the fine gray dust. "This is what I tried to tell you about. It's not a pathogen. It's an echo. The memory of every person buried in those mounds, every violent death, every slow, wasting sickness. The land is breathing it out, and you've been breathing it in." My father's head turned slowly, his eyes finally focusing on me. There was no mockery left in them, only a vast, cavernous terror. You were right," he rasped, the words like sandpaper. "Being right doesn't fix this," I told him, my gaze sweeping over all of them. This was the moment, the vindication. But it tasted like ash. I reached up and unclasped my respirator, lifting it to my face. "There's no cure. There's only management, filtration. You have to leave. Now. You have to abandon this house, this town. Everything you told me was more important than my obsession." I held the mask in my hand, a complex lattice of wires, filters, and resonating plates. This is what survival looks like now. This is the price of living downwind of history. They stared at the device, at the faint tremor in my hand, a permanent souvenir from my own near-fatal exposure. They saw the hollows under my eyes, the unnatural stillness in my posture. They weren't just seeing a strange machine. They were seeing the years of horror I'd endured, the madness I had wrestled into submission. They were witnessing the terrifying weight of the truth they had mocked, and in that moment, they finally, truly understood. Their disbelief hadn't protected them. It had just left them defenseless. I watched them pack, their movements frantic and clumsy. I didn't come back for an apology or for an "I told you so." I came back because in the end, they were all I had left. But the son and brother they knew was gone, buried under years of spectral dust. I am something else now, a survivor, a cartographer of sorrows. As they slid into the night, I stood alone in the screaming silence of my childhood home.